What's up guys, welcome to the Nova Strength YouTube channel. In today's video, we're gonna go over if you are tucking your elbows too much in the bench press. So the first thing we're gonna go over is your grip width, which will largely determine the optimal position of your elbows during the descent and ascent of the bench press. The general rule of thumb here is to keep the joints as stacked as possible. So with this in mind, we can expect that the wider the grip is, the more flared out your elbow position will be. Likewise, the more narrow your grip is, the more tucked your elbows may be. Again, this has to do with the idea that in order to transfer as much force through the body to the bar, the joints should be as stacked and in line with the resistance as possible. What do I mean when I say joints stacked? This basically means relative to the bar, we see the elbow stacked under the wrists and the wrist stacked under the bar. Now, if you watched my other video about how to bench with your back, you'll notice that in these rowing videos here, the wider my grip is and the more flared and internally rotated my shoulders are, the more upper back and retracted position I'm going to have. Likewise, something like a dumbbell row where my arm and elbow are a little bit more tucked in towards my body, that's going to require a little bit more external rotation and lat demand. And this brings me to my next point about the touch point, which is where the bar is going to touch on your chest. So with all of that being said, no matter if you have a wider or a more narrow grip, you can still tuck your elbows and keep your joints stacked. But this will mean that your touch point will be either lower on your chest or higher on your chest. And depending on that position, you will be required to create more or less internal or external rotation through the shoulders, the retractors, or the lats to maintain that joint stacking and stability. Now, why is the touch point important? It's just a side note because the higher the touch point is, the less horizontal force transfer you have to create. So this means that the lower the touch point, the more diagonal force you're going to have to generate. So if you have a higher touch point, more than likely you're going to incorporate a little bit more pec dominant position versus a lower touch point, you're going to incorporate a little bit more triceps and shoulders. You can determine if you're tucking too much by seeing or comparing the consistency of your position during the descent and ascent of the movement. So generally, if we see the elbows deviating to a flared position on the way up, more than likely this means that you are over tucking on the way down. To combat this, we want to think slight internal rotation at the shoulder and slight flare of the elbows so that you can maintain the position on the way down and on the way up to generate more efficient force transfer. There will be instances where the elbow position stays relatively stagnant and we don't see necessarily a deviation, but you may also be underutilizing the activity of the bigger muscle groups like the pecs by limiting the amount of active internal rotation demand you provide at the shoulder. Now, there are a couple technique mistakes that often lead to the over tucking of the elbows. The first one is going to be tucking or twisting at the elbow versus actually utilizing the shoulders. Many people think that they need to quote unquote bend the bar, and this cue often causes lifters to over tuck and just twist at the elbows rather than set the shoulders and lats through the actual shoulder blades and back. Another technique mistake that people often make that leads to over tucking the elbows is allowing their wrists to actively extend and flex as they're pressing. And many people will compensate active stability and setting their shoulders by actively cocking back their wrists as they start descending. And then we'll see that the wrists are very unstable, and this decreases the amount of joint stacking because now the bar is rolling towards the back of your palm and is no longer stacked over your wrist joint. And then when you press, we'll often see that the grip rolls back forward and we see a lot of instability there. So what I suggest doing is learning how to properly set your shoulders through the actual shoulder blades itself, and then from there allowing some slight internal rotation through the shoulders, keeping the elbows slightly flared enough to stay stacked under the bar and the ability to maintain that position as you press up. If you set your shoulders properly but allow for some slight elbow flare and internal rotation, in which case will vary on how much depending on your grip width, you'll be in a more stable and efficient position, and you're more than likely able to feel an actual difference between these two by feeling like you're using your pecs and back versus using more your triceps and shoulders. And that's it for this video, guys. I hope you found it helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comment box below, and I will catch you guys next time.